Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin. I have Falcoholic Kevin here to bring you the Falcons edge rusher review, which is a position that has been the subject of much consternation over many, many years for this Falcons team. It seems like ever since Jonathan Abraham left the building, the Falcons have been perennially searching for that edge rusher solution. Even one good one would be nice to have from time to time. And while it has happened in spurts, we did have a couple of good seasons here and there. Obviously, the season with Ryan Nielsen was unexpectedly good. We had a good year in 2017. We had Vic Beasley's breakout season during the Super Bowl run that unfortunately was never really followed up with anything else. But it's been a long road without much success at the position. The Falcons have struggled mightily to find consistent pass rush in general, but especially on the edge. And the team, I think, took some major steps to trying to fix that issue this year by taking 2 first-round edge rushers in this class, which, of course, is a bold move, and there may be future consequences for that move. We'll obviously get to that more in 2026, but Falcons added Jalon Walker, pick 15, which was considered obviously a steal by most, considering that Walker was expected to be a top 8, top 10 pick. And James Pearce Jr., who was one of my favorite edge rushers as well, and I was really surprised to be able to get him late in the first round. So those are 2 major additions to this group, which is filled with new faces, but also got a couple of guys that I think are going to be really good contributors from last year as well. So I think it's an exciting group. It's obviously one that a lot of our hopes and dreams are resting on pretty much every year, but this year in particular is a big deal. So we're going to dive into this edge rush room, figure out where these guys are going to play. I think there's a couple of archetypes that we're going to see here that are going to be sort of rotated in different sort of situations. So we'll get to that, talk about the guys in those groups and who do we think is going to be playing, who do we think is going to make the roster, who's competing for the practice squad, all that good stuff on today's show. Before we get started, I want to bring you guys a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline, folks. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball, of course, is in full swing. I know we got the Home Run Derby just wrapping up. All-Star Week is in process, but football season is right around the corner, and BetOnline's got you covered with more ways than ever to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, and even live in-game betting options. From MLB, UFC, they've got tennis, and a bunch of NFL futures now. If you want to get all preseason degen with all the preseason bets, I'm sure they will have those up soon. And of course, all the futures you can get your hands on. If you're feeling really good about where the Falcons stand after that Tristan Wirfs injury in terms of winning the NFC South, I'm sure you could still get good odds on Atlanta to win the division. So you can check that out. Otherwise, you could also head over to BetOnline's casino, where they've got all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, live slots, live blackjack, all that stuff. So what are you waiting for, folks? Head to that website today. It's betonline.ag, and take advantage of their industry-leading loyalty VIP program, where they've got level-up bonuses, weekly cash boosts, all that stuff. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. So, one real quick plug, of course, for our Falcons fan gathering, which is going to be Saturday, July 26th at 6 p.m. at Firemaker Brewing in Atlanta, which will, of course, be after Back Together Saturday at Flowery Branch. So after practice, you can come back home, shower, get back in the AC for a little while, and then join us at Firemaker Brewing in West Midtown for some great beers. Love Firemaker's lineup. They've got 32 taps. They're going to be hosting us. It's going to be a great time. If weather and tech permit, we will be also trying to do a live show. And, of course, we'll be getting the audience involved with the live show. I mean, how could we not? So we're hoping for that, too. But otherwise, we'll be there for several hours. We're just going to hang out, talk Falcons, and get to know some folks in the local area. And if you're coming in out of town, we'd love to see you, too. So check us out there at Firemaker at 6 p.m. on July 26th. Hope to see you guys there. All right. So for today's show, edge rusher is the topic, and I think it's a good group. I think the depth chart as a whole is looking as strong as it's looked in quite some time, right? A very long time. And while there's not a ton of guys in this room, I think the competition for the roster spots will be quite extreme, because I think there's a lot of guys that are sort of locked in due to either contract or draft status. I think there's very little room for someone to sort of jump up into the next category, but I think the fight for the practice squad will be vicious too, because I think there's several guys that I think have a compelling case for that spot. So we'll get into that, but before we do it, I want to sort of label, I think, the two kind of archetypes that we're going to see in this room. Much like with defensive tackle, I think they're going to have several sort of roles, and how they deploy those roles might vary depending on down and distance, third down, pass rush situations, goal line, short yardage, run defense, or just sort of base package plays. They may deploy like two of these guys instead of one, or I think in most situations they'll probably deploy one of each, and then that sort of thing. So I believe we will have sort of the big end run stuffing focused role, right? Which maybe it's going to be a 5 tech, it's going to be a big player. Maybe some of these guys that would have been playing 3-4 defensive end last year might get snaps here. I think Zach Harrison is the starter in that role, and they've said he's probably going to play mostly on the edge in that role, and I think that's a great spot for him. He's a big, strong, and super duper long edge rusher, and I think his play against the run will be pretty important for this team. And I think he's also got a lot of upside as a pass rusher. When he has been able to play edge, I think he's looked pretty good. So I'm excited to see him. But Zach Harrison is one of the guys there. Behind him, I believe we're going to see Braylon Trice a lot. As you guys might remember, Braylon Trice is a big stand-up edge rusher. He may still stand up. He may put his hand in the dirt. But Trice, I think, is going to be one of their primary run defenders as well. He can obviously play sort of a stand-up role when needed, but I think Trice is going to be factoring into that big edge room too. And then I think the other guy to keep in mind here is Brandon Dorless, who I do have listed with the defensive tackles, the interior guys, but I think he will probably play some big end as well, because he's done it before. And he's a guy that has a lot of experience playing on the edge. I mean, this is a guy that stood up at like 290 pounds in college and played on the edge. So he's available for that role as well. I think Dorless might just be one of the main rotational guys that kind of goes where he's needed, sort of a Derek Shelby type, right? And then I think Khalid Kareem, who I think is more slotted for the practice squad, is going to be involved in this mix too. And then in terms of the 3-4 outside linebacker, the stand-up rusher type. I'm trying to remember what Quinn's defense referred to them as. Maybe it was like the Jack or something like that. I can't remember. But these guys, pretty obvious who these guys are going to be, right? The Falcons have a lot of them. Jalon Walker is going to be in this group. James Pearce Jr., Arnold Ebiketie, and Leonard Floyd, the big free agent addition. Those guys are, and I think D'Angelo Malone would be in that sort of group as well. So they've got kind of their stand-up style guys, their jack linebackers, and some of these guys are obviously capable of hand in the dirt rushing. James Pearce can do that. And Leonard Floyd has obviously been able to do that too. But these guys will probably stand up most of the time. And when you have one of these guys like Zach Harrison playing, plus one of these stand-up guys, which I think will be most of the time, it'll give the appearance of this sort of hybrid front, which I think is mostly what this will be. They're going to go back and forth between 3-4 and 4-3 sort of looks as it benefits the team. So those are sort of the two categories. But I think, you look at this group and they're going to have a lot of options for how to deploy these guys in different spots. So, looking, of course, everyone, of course, wants to talk about Jalon Walker and James Pearce Jr. in this group. I actually think that this will probably see Arnold Ebiketie start here, unless Walker or Pearce just absolutely blows the doors off the coaching staff in training camp, which is possible. I mean, these are 2 first-round picks. I think Ebiketie is going to get the first crack here, but they're going to have a deep rotation, and I kind of think that Jalon Walker is just going to find his way onto the field, like sort of however they can get him out there, whether that's sort of as like an overhang same linebacker who's going to pass rush a ton, or just playing some edge snaps, depending. I think the team is going to be getting Jalon Walker on the field sort of however they can. And then, so I think Arnold Ebiketie is going to be one of your primary pass rushers. Then you're going to have Jalon Walker and James Pearce Jr. sort of as your primary rotational guys. And then I think Leonard Floyd is the ideal sort of third down specialist. And I think he's going to be out there a lot on third downs, given his experience. And I think in those third down situations is when you're going to see two of these sort of stand-up guys on the field together, and maybe even one of these, like, big end types kicked inside, like a Brandon Dorless or Zach Harrison. Probably more of the Dorless role there, Morgan Fox, those type of guys in there to sort of maximize your pass rush. So I think Ebiketie going to play a lot. He seems like the forgotten man to a lot of people. Like, oh, we got these new edge rushers, so now Ebiketie's relegated to the bench. I think Ebiketie going to play a lot. I think he'll benefit a lot from having better players around him and sort of not having to carry the load by himself, which I don't think that was ever reasonable to expect him to be just like a Myles Garrett type where he could just carry the load of the pass rush by himself. It's just not who he is. I mean, we're talking about a second-round pick here. But I like where he's at. I think Jalon Walker, they're going to find a way to get him involved as much as possible. I know they've said they're going to make him play edge primarily, and I think that's wise. But how he actually gets to the edge, that's, I think, open for discussion. And I think especially in base package stuff, where they're, potentially not rolling out nickel, that sort of third linebacker, quote unquote, is probably going to be Jalon Walker, who's just going to kind of walk down and play that overhang Sam linebacker, who's basically lined up on the line of scrimmage as an extra, rusher. So, and then he gets to sort of beat the pants off a tight end. So, that's always nice to see. James Pearce, I think you're going to see him as more of a traditional edge rusher. I think he's going to hand in the dirt or stand up rush from either alignment. And, Pearce, I think, is going to play a lot in a role that is probably pretty typical. I don't think they're going to get too crazy with it. But I think he's going to be obviously one of your primary pass rush specialists. And I'm curious to see how Pearce holds up as a run defender in the NFL. I think he made a lot of effort to get better in that regard in college last year, when he probably could have just coasted and been a first-round pick. So I don't think, I know some people think he's sort of a liability there. I'm not sure that he will be. But again, the NFL is a different beast. And it's a lot more challenging to block these offensive linemen and hold up in the run game. So while I don't think James Pearce Jr., we should be thinking he's like some kind of liability against the run, it may take him a little bit to acclimate to this NFL talent level. I mean, that is how it is. But I think he'll still be an effective pass rusher there. And then Leonard Floyd, I think, is just going to be your third down specialist. I imagine the Falcons will not want him to play too much, especially early downs. They want to keep him fresh. Sort of, if you remember Dwight Freeney's role, right, which was great. We loved having him here. He didn't play like a massive amount of snaps, and he was basically a pass rush specialist for this team, but he brought a lot of pass rush, obviously. And then he also, I think, just his veteran experience and his ability to sort of coach up on the field these young edge rushers who the Falcons at the time had a lot of. I think that made a big difference. And I think that is the same sort of thought process here, bringing in Leonard Floyd, who's really happy to be here. He's finally able to play close to home in Atlanta. Stars kind of aligned for him there. So I think he's excited to be here. Falcons gave him a good contract. I think he's going to play and be important to this rotation, but this is really a passing of the torch role for him, where he's still going to be a key figure, but he's sort of mentoring and sort of going to be possibly seeding this, major role to these younger, up and coming first round picks over the course of the season. And I'm excited to see how he fares there. And then the other guy in this sort of rotation here is D'Angelo Malone, who I think is always got a good shot for the practice squad because of how critical he has been on special teams. He's really kind of emerged as just a really good special teams player. Hasn't ever really translated to the field, and obviously had one of the most critical errors of anyone last year in a critical situation when he was on the field. So I think this is probably the year that Malone sees himself going down to the practice squad, but I think he's a good fit there, and he'll get elevated if there are any injuries. And I think he's a guy that's probably going to have a long NFL career. It's just you're hoping for more than that with a third round pick, obviously. And then in terms of these large boys, the thick lads, the boys that are going to be playing that 5-tech run stuffing role, a couple guys to talk about here as well. So I think Zach Harrison's going to start here, and I love Harrison in this role. I just think he just always looked a little bit uncomfortable on the interior, and not like he played poorly there, but this is going to lead me into another tangent of complaining about his usage. But I just can't believe that the Falcons took one of their only promising edge rushers and stuffed him into an interior defensive line rotation that was so packed, that had 3 draft picks added to it, that one of them couldn't even make the roster because there just wasn't room available, and he ended up getting poached, and now he's playing for the Bills, and they like him. And so you decide to convert one of your only promising edge rushers to the interior, where he can play like 10 snaps a game. It was incredibly foolish. Somebody should have vetoed that from the very beginning. Thankfully, that seems to have been reversed. Now Harrison's back on the edge, where I think his length and athleticism out there can really be a boost. And I'm hoping that we'll see him really take the reins of this role and kind of run with it, because I think if he can be a really good run defender for you there, that's obviously what his role is for. But if he can also be some kind of pass rusher, that you can play him, alongside a stand-up guy on the other side, and he's not like a negative as a pass rusher. Maybe he's not as good as like a James Pearce Jr. or Ebiketie or Leonard Floyd, but if he can give you like, a lot, he could give you some pass rush, like still a double-digit pass rush win rate, right? But not quite, 20% like some of these elite pass rushers. I think that's a great role for him, and that could really make the Falcons' base defense and their ability to stuff the run a lot better. And so I'm hoping that he will emerge as the clear starter there and play, maybe 30% of the snaps, 40% of the snaps more, because he's such a key piece. I think he has the potential to emerge as that key piece here. Braylon Trice is the guy I would have sort of behind him. And I think Trice obviously has more pass rushing background, more success as a pass rusher in his college career than Zach Harrison, who was a very good run defender, but a guy that sort of never reached that pass rush ceiling. Trice was the most productive pass rusher in college football in 2023, in the 2023 season, in terms of pressures, right? I think he had like 70 pressures, something nuts. He's just a bat out of hell pressure generator. And while he had plenty of sacks in college, that his pressure to sack rate was not quite as extreme as you might think for someone causing that many pressures. But he's great at disrupting the quarterback. Not always. He's got a little bit of a length issue, so he's not always able to finish. But I think he's a guy that can absolutely cause havoc there. And then he's just a ferocious physical player. I think he can be a good run defender as well because of that. And he's just a bigger stand-up rusher, right? So if they want to show like a 3-4 look with 2 stand-up rushers, I think he was in the 270s last year. I don't know if he's still there, but he's a big boy, and I think he'll be out there probably backing up Zach Harrison, giving them some more physicality at that position. And then Brandon Dorlus is the other guy that I think will mix in here as needed. And it may be more for just run specific situations. Like if we're doing a short yardage 3rd and 1, or we got a goal line situation, I guarantee you'll probably have Brandon Dorlus out there at one of the 5 tech spots, just trying to get some extra beef on the field. He can rotate with Zach Harrison if they're looking for that bigger presence out there to stuff up the run. But I think his ability to pass rush from that 5 tech position is basically just going to be bull rushing and trying to convert speed to power, that sort of thing. Not necessarily going to be able to get around the outside shoulder of anyone at his much higher playing weight now of like basically close to 300. So we'll see how that develops, but I think he's in that room as well. And then Khalid Kareem, we'll see if he can make the roster. Probably would need an injury to crack the 53, but much like D'Angelo Malone, I think he's got a really good shot at the practice squad. I think he's a guy that did show some things in flashes. I think he's a good run defender. So I think he'll be in the mix for that sort of role of being a primary base package player and run defender. And he's got the size to fit in there as well. So I think he'll be a good fit in that spot. And yeah, I think that's most of the guys that we will see playing edge. I think some of these guys have the possibility to, like some of these interior guys have the possibility to maybe kick outside sometimes. Rook obviously could, given his size and athleticism. I think Contavious Street has played on the edge from time to time. Simeon Barrow Jr. for Miami, he's undersized for a defensive tackle. He's in the 280s, but I wonder if they have sort of that Zach Harrison style role maybe in mind for him, and he's able to sort of, Brandon Dorless role perhaps, where he's going to play outside some and maybe be able to kick inside in pass rushing situations. So I would keep an eye on him as well. But I think the rotations are pretty set. I think the Falcons obviously want more of these pass rushers so they can rotate them a lot. And I think we're going to see more situations with two of the pass rushers on the field, two of the stand-up, specialist guys, than we will see two run defenders. That's just kind of the way the NFL is going. But I think at this point, like, the Falcons have a deep rotation of guys. Hopefully there's not a huge drop off between like Floyd and these rookies and Ebiketie, and they've got that sort of 4 deep going there where they can, really keep offenses on their toes with this just stack of pass rushers. And I think none of these guys at this point are like, again, Myles Garrett level, elite dominating edge rushers. Maybe some of these rookies can get there eventually. That would be great. But because of the depth of the rotation should at least help. Like, if we could get, 6 sacks by 4 guys instead of like 10 sacks by 1 guy and like 2 or 3 sacks by a couple guys, right? I mean, that could work out to be better. If we could, Walker gets 5 or 6 sacks, Ebiketie gets 5 or 6 sacks, James Pearce gets 5 or 6 sacks, maybe Floyd's getting like 8.5 sacks. Seems like he does that every year. That would be a great way to kick things off and help the pass rush be a lot more effective when guys have to miss time, when guys have to come off the field to take a breather. If you can keep the pressure on with a good rotation, that can make your defense look a lot better than, it is. Like, you don't have this elite player, but you can you're not going to have a drop off when you do have to rotate. I think that is another way to build an effective pass rush. And I think that's what the Falcons are going for with the depth of this group. And hopefully some of these guys can emerge as elite pass rushers. That would be awesome. I know there's super high expectations for Jalon Walker and James Pearce Jr. Again, rookie pass rushers, you have to kind of temper those a little bit. Just don't expect double-digit sacks. It's very, very rare to see that happen. But they could be effective pressure players. We obviously saw Jared Verse have a great season last year, even though the sack numbers weren't crazy. It was very effective. But remember, Latu and Dallas Turner, who were 2 guys that fans were pretty obsessed with, didn't really, Dallas Turner in particular didn't really do much at all. And then Latu had a pretty quiet season. Verse was kind of the one that hit. So that doesn't mean I think that Latu or Dallas Turner aren't going to have good careers. It's just the nature of the beast in the NFL. It's a big transition, and guys don't always take that step super quickly. So here's to hoping at least one of Walker and Pearce hit the ground running. But I think Walker obviously is going to play a lot. No doubt about that. They're going to find ways to get him out there. And Pearce, I think they want him to quickly become their primary go-to pass rusher. So, we'll see how quickly those 2 guys take over the starting jobs and how quickly they get out there. But I think this is a really exciting group. This is, I think, the one that has a lot of hope attached to it, a lot of resources finally placed into this group. And, I think the Falcons are really expecting a step up in production from these guys, obviously, but just to have a lot of hope and a lot of future ability here that we finally sort of invested in this room, and now we can get dividends paid going forward, and especially in 2026, when I think is really the year that this team wants to put the gas pedal down and start trying to compete for Super Bowl and not just trying to make the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. So hopefully we can make the playoffs this year, that we can, stepping stone over to Super Bowl contention next year. That would be great. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Hope you enjoyed the Edge Rusher review. Like I said, hope you guys could join us at Firemaker Brewing on July 26th after get back together Saturday. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, thanks to BetOnline for sponsoring today's episode. We'll be back on Wednesday with some training camp predictions featuring friend of the show, Joe Patrick. And, of course, we'll be back after that, finishing up our roster review series with Alan Stirk, where we're going to take a look at linebacker and safety later this week. So keep an eye out for that. And then next week, guys, training camp will be here. So we're going to have some training camp preview stuff. We're going to have my pre-camp roster projection. Falcons haven't made a lot of moves, so probably won't change a ton, but a couple things have changed, right? So we'll take a look at that. And then we'll be on to camp itself starting on Thursday, where Adnan and I will both be in Flowery Branch, and we'll be hanging out, and we'll have more updates for you then. But until then, guys, thanks so much for joining us here on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. That really helps us out. If you haven't left that 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice, also really helps us out. Appreciate that. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you guys in Atlanta. Looking forward to getting some boots on the ground there. And football season is just almost there. We've survived the dead zone, guys. We're so close. So we're looking forward to some good times here. Hopefully a good season from these Atlanta Falcons. Until next time, I'm Kevin Knight of Falcoholic Kevin. We'll see you guys. Have a good one.